Gavin and Ewan MacNeil were the last people anyone in the quiet Highlands of Scotland would suspect. With their easy charm and neighbourly smiles, they blended seamlessly into village life, but behind closed doors, these brothers built a ruthless criminal empire marked by drugs, violence and secrets so dark they would shake their community to its core. Strathcaran was the kind of place where change came slowly, if at all. Nestled deep in the Highlands of Scotland, it was surrounded by rolling hills, damp woodlands and narrow roads that wound like ribbons through the quiet countryside. Life here was simple and steady. Farmers rose early, shops closed by 6, and the local pub was the heart of the village. It was a place where everyone knew each other, where gossip moved faster than cars, and secrets were hard to keep. So when Gavin and Ewan MacNeil returned to the village in 2013 after nearly a decade away, people noticed. The MacNeil brothers had grown up in Strathcaran but had left in their early 20s. They were remembered as spirited boys, charming, mischievous, but never cruel. Their parents had owned a modest sheep farm just outside the village, and the boys helped with chores and played football in the fields. Their father, Callum MacNeil, was a quiet man, respected and well-liked. When their mother passed suddenly, the brothers left soon after. Rumors swirled. Some said they were chasing jobs in Glasgow. Others whispered about trouble with the law. But as time passed, people forgot. The farm fell into disrepair. Callum grew older, and the MacNeil name faded into the background. Then, out of the blue, the brothers came back. They arrived together in a black pickup truck with city plates. Both were broader, sharper-looking, dressed in clothes too polished for farm work. Gavin, the older of the two, had a calm, calculating presence. Ewan was more restless, always scanning, as if sizing people up. They told the locals they had returned to help their father and bring the farm back to life. Their story was believable. Callum was frail by then, and the farm needed work. The brothers threw themselves into it, repairing fences, restoring the barn, and planting new crops. At first, the village welcomed them back with open arms. People brought casseroles, offered tools, and came to help fix up the place. Gavin would chat with neighbors at the pub, buying rounds and remembering names. Ewan helped clear snow in winter and donated to the local school's fundraiser. They were seen as hometown boys done good, returning with ambition and appreciation. For a while, things seemed hopeful. The old MacNeil farm buzzed with activity. Strangers came and went. Contractors, they said. Delivery trucks began to show up regularly, usually at odd hours, but no one asked questions. After all, things were improving. The land looked better, the house was no longer falling apart, and the brothers were friendly and polite. But beneath the surface, something wasn't right. Locals started to notice small things. Doors bolted that had never been locked before. New fences with motion lights and cameras mounted on trees facing the road. The activity around the farm grew more secretive. The once welcoming home became a place of silence. Still, the MacNeils smiled, nodded, and said all the right things. In a village built on trust, no one wanted to believe what was slowly creeping into the shadows. Strathcaran remained peaceful on the outside, but the storm had already begun. By the time a year had passed, Strathcaran had quietly transformed. To most, the change was subtle, just a few new faces in town, the occasional truck rattling down the narrow lanes, a sense that the village was a little busier than before. But to those paying closer attention, something far more complex was unfolding. The MacNeil brothers were no longer simply rebuilding a farm. They were laying the foundation for something hidden and dangerous. At the center of it all was the old barn. Once used for storing hay and tools, it had been completely sealed off. Gavin told neighbors it was being renovated into a workshop. But the windows were blacked out, a new ventilation system buzzed late into the night, and the padlocks on the doors were industrial grade. No one was ever invited inside. Occasionally, men unfamiliar to the village would drive up in unmarked vans and disappear behind the barn doors. They never spoke to locals, never made eye contact, and left as quickly as they came. The trucks became a regular feature, arriving during rainstorms or at dusk, always avoiding attention. Some carried large crates. Others came empty and left full. The MacNeils claimed they were selling organic feed to specialty suppliers in Glasgow and Edinburgh. To anyone who asked, they had a dozen convincing explanations, but behind the scenes, the barn had become a fully operational drug lab. focused on producing and packaging synthetic opioids, small potent pills that were easy to transport and even easier to hide. Strathcaran's location was perfect. Its distance from major cities meant fewer prying eyes, while its tight-knit community discouraged outsiders from lingering. The single-track roads and thick forests offered natural protection, making it difficult for police surveillance. Gavin handled the logistics and business dealings, working through a web of shell companies. Ewan, more aggressive, oversaw security and ensured loyalty, both from their couriers and the men who had come north to help run operations. Their criminal web grew quickly. From Strathcaran, drugs were transported south via hidden compartments in farm equipment and commercial lorries. Money flowed in from multiple sources, laundered through local businesses they quietly acquired, a garage, a convenience shop, even a small fishing company that barely operated. No one could trace the origins, and anyone who got too close was either bought off or warned away. Meanwhile, the brothers maintained their carefully curated image. Gavin joined community boards and donated to rural development projects. Ewan played the local hero, volunteering during floods and power outages. People admired their hard work, their supposed commitment to reviving the village. No one suspected that under the surface the MacNeils were turning Strathcaran into a hub for organized crime. The village continued to function as it always had. Church services on Sundays, children walking to school, farmers attending livestock auctions. But everything was changing. A network of illegal activity had taken root under the cover of rural peace, and it was spreading fast. The web of shadows had wrapped itself tightly around the village. No one knew it yet, but Strathcaran was no longer the safe haven it appeared to be. To the outside world, Gavin and Ewan MacNeil were model citizens. They had returned to their childhood village with purpose, poured time and money into the struggling farm, and appeared deeply invested in the well-being of Strathcaran. Their public image was not just good, it was flawless. The brothers had built a mask of respectability so carefully that even those closest to them never saw it slip. Gavin, always calm and composed, became a respected figure in the community. He joined the village council, offering practical suggestions for local issues and speaking in a measured, thoughtful tone that impressed even the older residents. He sponsored local events, helped refurbish the community hall, and made donations to the school's music program. When the church needed a new roof, a quiet envelope from Gavin covered the cost. People praised his generosity, calling him the kind of man who remembered where he came from. Ewan, on the other hand, was more hands-on. He offered help to elderly neighbors, clearing snow from driveways in the winter or delivering groceries during storms. He was often seen at the local fire station, assisting with training drills or helping organize safety demonstrations for school children. He laughed easily, shook hands firmly, and always had time to stop and chat. His rougher edge was masked by a charm that made him seem approachable and trustworthy. Together they gave the impression of hard-working, loyal sons who had returned to breathe life back into a forgotten village. The community embraced them. When someone questioned the steady flow of visitors to the farm or the trucks that arrived late at night, others were quick to defend them. "The MacNeil boys are doing good things," they'd say. "Don't go making stories where there aren't any." Behind this mask, however, the brothers were growing their criminal operation with precision. Every kind gesture, every act of charity was calculated. It bought silence. It created loyalty. It made suspicion seem ungrateful, even disrespectful. Those who noticed small inconsistencies, the way certain visitors never spoke or the sudden wealth that didn't quite match the farm's modest success, kept quiet. No one wanted to believe the truth, and the brothers made sure they didn't have to. Local police, limited in number and resources, were among those convinced by the facade. Gavin often met with officers under the pretense of community outreach. He brought them coffee, asked about their families, and discussed rural safety issues. Ewan invited them to training exercises at the firehouse. By weaving themselves into the fabric of the village, the MacNeils ensured that any investigation into their affairs would seem unnecessary, even insulting. Their charm became their most powerful weapon. It deflected scrutiny, diffused suspicion, and allowed them to operate freely. As their network expanded, they tightened their grip on the village. Strathcaran had become both their shield and their hiding place. While the world saw two generous brothers rebuilding a legacy, the truth was far darker. Their empire was built not just on drugs and deceit, but on the trust of a community that never thought to question them. As the McNeil operation grew, so did the need to protect it. Their charm had opened doors and silenced questions, but it couldn't manage everything. With more money flowing in and more people involved, risks multiplied. Mistakes became costlier, and loyalty was no longer guaranteed. Gavin remained the strategist, but it was Ewan who took on the darker tasks. He understood that power was only as strong as fear allowed it to be. The first sign of their shift came quietly. A young courier from Perth, barely 20 years old, disappeared after losing a shipment en route to Edinburgh. A week later, his body was pulled from the River Tay. The official cause was listed as accidental drowning, but those within the network knew otherwise. He had dropped product, panicked, and confessed to someone who shouldn't have known. That was enough. Ewan made the call. From that moment forward, the message was clear. Mistakes weren't tolerated, and silence was enforced. Fear became a tool as useful as any vehicle or burner phone. The brothers began recruiting enforcers, men brought in from Glasgow and Aberdeen, hardened by years in the criminal world. They didn't speak to villagers, they didn't draw attention, but they moved with quiet purpose, patrolling the property at night, monitoring shipments, and dealing with internal problems. If someone stepped out of line, they were handled quietly, efficiently. A missed payment might result in a broken window. A second offense could mean a broken arm. No one went to the police. No one dared. One local man, a mechanic who had unknowingly serviced several of the modified transport vehicles, began asking questions. He noticed unusual wiring and secret compartments, things that didn't belong in any normal delivery van. A week later, he left Strathcaran without warning. His house was found empty, his phone disconnected. Neighbors said he had moved to care for a sick relative. Those closer to the truth knew better. The brothers had mastered the balance of kindness and cruelty. They continued attending charity dinners and sponsoring sports teams while their enforcers operated in the shadows. Gavin made sure everything appeared legitimate on paper. Ewan ensured that fear flowed quietly beneath the surface. Together they created an atmosphere where no one knew exactly what was happening, but everyone understood it was dangerous to ask. Even within their network, trust was thin. New recruits were watched constantly. Routes were changed frequently. No one had a full picture of the operation, and that was intentional. Gavin once told an associate, "The fewer people who know the whole map, the harder it is for someone to burn it." That mindset shaped every part of their empire. By 2020, the McNeils were untouchable in the eyes of most. Their grip on Strathcaran was invisible but absolute. The brothers didn't need to raise their voices or make threats. People simply fell in line or disappeared. And while the village went on with its routines, the undercurrent of fear grew stronger. The charm was still there, still smiling, but behind it was a machine that crushed anything in its way. Connor Greaves arrived in Strathcaran just as the McNeil brothers were reaching their peak. He was introduced as a cousin from Inverness, a quiet man in his early 30s with a vague past and a talent for staying unnoticed. Gavin said he was family, someone they trusted. That was enough for most. He began helping out with deliveries, driving long distances through the highlands and into the cities, always punctual, never drawing attention. Within weeks he was part of the inner circle. What no one in Strathcaran knew, not even Ewan at first, was that Connor had a history with the law. Just 6 months before arriving in the village, he'd been arrested during a sting operation in Aberdeen. Faced with a long prison sentence and limited options, Connor made a decision that would ultimately unravel the entire McNeil empire. He agreed to work as an informant for Police Scotland's organised crime division. Connor wasn't a typical undercover agent. He didn't wear a badge, didn't carry a gun, and had no formal training. But he knew how to blend in. And more importantly, he knew how to stay alive. His instructions were simple: observe, report, and survive. He was fitted with a discreet recording device, and everything he saw, heard, or moved became part of a growing file the police were assembling in secret. Each drive he made, each drop-off, each conversation with suppliers or middlemen was logged and analyzed. At first the McNeils gave him menial tasks, fuel runs, minor deliveries, basic errands. But Connor was patient. He didn't rush, didn't ask questions, didn't try to prove himself. He kept his head down and waited. Slowly they began to trust him. Ewan started involving him in night runs and packaging operations. Gavin gave him access to some of the ledgers, teaching him how to code the transactions to avoid detection. All of it was recorded, every code, every route, every hidden compartment. Connor fed it back, piece by piece, building a picture the authorities had never seen before. For the first time, police had eyes inside the operation, and yet they knew they had to wait. The McNeils were careful, clever enough to avoid careless mistakes. One wrong move, one misplaced suspicion, and Connor would vanish like the others. So the investigation grew quietly, fed by Connor's observations and digital trail. With every week the case strengthened, and the walls around the McNeils began to close in. Connor's position became more dangerous as his value increased. He witnessed things he couldn't unsee, threats made in the dark, whispered conversations about missing people, and sudden unexplained disappearances. Each time he felt the weight of fear pressing down, he reminded himself of the deal he made and what was at stake. He wasn't just helping the police, he was buying back his freedom, and in doing so, he became the silent force that would bring down two of the most dangerous men Scotland had ever known, all without ever raising his voice. By early 2020, the McNeil operation was running with the precision of a machine. The routes were refined, the distribution lines steady, and the money flowing cleanly through a network of fake businesses and offshore accounts. The brothers had become more cautious, more reclusive. Ewan in particular had grown paranoid. He rotated phones weekly, changed cars often, and trusted fewer people. But even the most careful criminal empire is vulnerable to one thing: human error. It started with a shipment bound for Aberdeen. Ewan had arranged it himself, bypassing Gavin's usual checks. He wanted it fast, and he wanted it quiet. The product, several thousand fentanyl pills. Connor fed it back, piece by piece, building a picture the authorities had never seen before. For the first time, police had eyes inside the operation, and yet they knew they had to wait. The McNeils were careful, clever enough to avoid careless mistakes. One wrong move, one misplaced suspicion, and Connor would vanish like the others. So the investigation grew quietly, fed by Connor's observations and digital trail. With every week the case strengthened, and the walls around the McNeils began to close in. Connor's position became more dangerous as his value increased. He witnessed things he couldn't unsee, threats made in the dark, whispered conversations about missing people, and sudden unexplained disappearances. Each time he felt the weight of fear pressing down, he reminded himself of the deal he made and what was at stake. He wasn't just helping the police, he was buying back his freedom, and in doing so, he became the silent force that would bring down two of the most dangerous men Scotland had ever known, all without ever raising his voice. By early 2020, the McNeil operation was running with the precision of a machine. The routes were refined, the distribution lines steady, and the money flowing cleanly through a network of fake businesses and offshore accounts. The brothers had become more cautious, more reclusive. Ewan in particular had grown paranoid. He rotated phones weekly, changed cars often, and trusted fewer people. But even the most careful criminal empire is vulnerable to one thing: human error. It started with a shipment bound for Aberdeen. Ewan had arranged it himself, bypassing Gavin's usual checks. He wanted it fast, and he wanted it quiet. The product, several thousand fentanyl pills, was packaged and hidden inside crates of fertilizer. But the driver, a new recruit eager to prove himself, took a wrong turn and ended up in the wrong hands. A rival gang intercepted the load. The McNeils had dealt with turf issues before, but this was different. This was theft, and Ewan took it personally. Within days, he ordered retaliation. 2 members of the rival crew were ambushed on a remote stretch of road outside Stonehaven. Their bodies were found hours later inside a burned-out van, charred beyond recognition. Officially, the cause of death was undetermined, but detectives noted the vehicle's unique paint, traces of a chemical compound used in the renovations of the McNeil barn. It was the first physical link to any violence associated with the brothers, and it didn't go unnoticed. Meanwhile, Connor Greaves continued feeding information to the authorities. With every delivery, he passed on photos, license plate numbers, GPS routes, and names. He had mapped nearly every layer of the operation. But now, with bodies showing up and media attention building, the police intensified their focus. They had waited long enough. Mistakes were being made, and the brothers were no longer as invisible as they once were. One of those mistakes came when Ewan used a burner phone to call a former associate in Dundee, a man under police surveillance. The call lasted less than 2 minutes, but it was enough for investigators to triangulate Ewan's location and begin constructing a digital timeline. From there they followed financial records tied to a series of unregistered vehicles, one of which had been spotted near the scene of the van fire. The puzzle was starting to come together. Investigators had hard evidence now: phone records, license plate matches, unusual chemical traces, and a growing list of names provided by Connor. They began preparing for coordinated raids, drawing up warrants and gathering tactical teams. But they still needed more. They needed something irrefutable, proof that couldn't be explained away with charm, donations, or small-town loyalty. And then they found it. Buried in a seized ledger from one of Gavin's shell companies was a single-line item, a payment to a man already in custody for drug trafficking. The code used matched one of the transactions Connor had decrypted weeks earlier. That connection gave them legal cause to move. The empire the MacNeils had spent years building was about to face its reckoning, triggered by one rush decision and a string of mistakes that led straight to their door. In the early hours of March 3, 2021, the silence of Strathcaran was broken. A convoy of unmarked vans and police vehicles crept through the village's narrow lanes, their headlights dimmed, engines humming low. The operation was codenamed Winter Moor, a coordinated effort months in the making, designed to strike simultaneously across multiple locations linked to the MacNeil brothers. The quiet Highlands village was about to witness the fall of its most dangerous residents. The first target was the MacNeil farmhouse, perched on the edge of the village and surrounded by frostbitten fields. Tactical officers moved in with precision, cutting power to the property before breaking through the reinforced front door. Ewan was the first to react. Woken by the noise, he tried to escape through the back, sprinting into the dark wearing only jeans and a coat. He didn't get far. Thermal drones picked up his movement, and officers tackled him in a muddy drainage ditch behind the barn. Inside the house, Gavin was found in the kitchen, eerily calm. He had just begun burning a small black notebook in the fireplace, pages curling into ash. Nearby, a laptop was open, its screen filled with encrypted spreadsheets. He was arrested without resistance, offering only a nod as he was handcuffed and led outside into the cold. At the same time, raids were underway at 12 other locations: storage units, rented flats, a fishing company warehouse, and a mechanic's garage in Inverness. Each site yielded crucial evidence: crates of unregistered pills, ledgers written in coded shorthand, weapons and hard drives filled with financial records. Dozens of individuals associated with the MacNeils were taken into custody, including the enforcers brought in from Glasgow and several drivers who had been running shipments across the country. The barn, once the heart of their operation, revealed its secrets too. Beneath layers of insulation and reinforced walls, officers discovered an industrial-grade pill press, chemical storage tanks, and air filtration systems designed to hide the smell of production. Lab tests confirmed that fentanyl and other synthetic opioids had been processed there in large quantities. What had looked like a quiet farming outbuilding was in truth a state-of-the-art drug lab hidden in plain sight. In the days that followed, news of the arrests spread quickly. The village, once blind to the truth, was stunned. Neighbors who had once praised the brothers now realized how deeply they had been deceived. The charm, the generosity, the helpful smiles, all had been part of a performance. Behind it was a ruthless operation that had cost lives, corrupted communities, and built an empire on addiction and fear. The MacNeil brothers were moved to a secure facility under heavy guard. Interrogations began, but both men refused to speak. Their silence didn't matter. The evidence spoke loud enough. What had once seemed unbreakable had crumbled overnight. The empire that had been hidden so carefully beneath the surface of a peaceful Highland village was finally exposed. And it had all come undone in a single morning. As investigators sifted through the mountain of evidence seized during the raids, a curious financial trail began to emerge, one that didn't quite fit the rest of the MacNeils' operation. Tucked between offshore transactions and coded business expenses was a recurring payment to a woman living in a coastal town in Portugal. The amount wasn't large, but it was consistent, showing up every month for nearly 10 years. On paper, she appeared to have no connection to the drug trade, and yet Gavin had been funneling money to her quietly, with no explanation. Digging deeper, detectives uncovered her identity: Sophia Mendes, a former Scottish resident who had abruptly relocated years earlier. But the real discovery came when they investigated her son Daniel. Now 22, Daniel was registered under a different surname, but his birth records told a different story. A DNA comparison confirmed what investigators hadn't expected. Daniel was Gavin McNeil's son. The revelation stunned even the police. Gavin, known for being methodical and calculating, had kept this part of his life entirely separate. But the more they uncovered, the more disturbing the truth became. Sophia had once been married to a man named Marcus Fraser, a former rival dealer from the early days of Gavin's criminal rise in Glasgow. Fraser had vanished mysteriously in 2009, his disappearance dismissed as another gangland casualty. Now, police began to suspect otherwise. As the timeline was pieced together, a chilling story took shape. Sophia had left Fraser shortly before his disappearance, taking young Daniel with her. Not long after, Gavin had arranged for her to leave Scotland entirely, funding her move and maintaining her safety in exchange for silence. It became clear that Fraser had likely been eliminated by Gavin, his body never found, the crime never investigated, because he posed a threat not just to Gavin's business but to a deeply personal secret. The monthly payments weren't hush money in the traditional sense. They were protection, a way for Gavin to keep control over the past. Investigators theorized that if anyone had discovered Daniel's true identity, it could have shattered Gavin's image and opened old wounds that could no longer be hidden. That's why Marcus Fraser had to disappear. That's why Sophia and her son had to be kept far away under the radar. This secret, once buried so carefully, became a turning point in the case. Prosecutors used it to paint a broader picture of the McNeil empire, not just as a drug syndicate, but as a world built on lies, violence, and control. Gavin's motive for Fraser's suspected murder added a personal human dimension to the charges, deepening public outrage and tightening the noose around the brothers. It also explained Gavin's unusual behavior during his arrest, the calm demeanor, the attempt to burn the notebook. He had known this truth was hidden in the files, and once it came to light there would be no turning back. The empire wasn't just collapsing, it was unraveling at the seams, pulled apart by a secret he'd tried to bury for over a decade. The trial of the McNeil brothers became one of the most watched criminal cases in Scotland's recent history. As the courtroom filled day after day with journalists, locals, and law enforcement officials, the full scope of the brothers' empire was laid bare in painstaking detail. For the first time, the quiet Highland village of Strathcaran was forced to confront the truth that had been hidden beneath its peaceful surface for so long. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence: financial records, phone logs, testimonies from former associates, and the physical remnants of the drug lab, created a clear narrative of criminal intent. The scale of the operation was shocking. Thousands of synthetic opioid pills produced monthly, trafficking routes that stretched from the Highlands to major cities across the UK, and a network of enforcers who ensured silence through fear and violence. Witnesses described the McNeils' dual nature, the charm that disarmed neighbors and the cruelty that punished betrayal. Former couriers and insiders recounted stories of intimidation, threats, and disappearances. The prosecution emphasized how the brothers had exploited the trust of their own community, turning a place of quiet farming into a center of addiction and death. The defense tried to dismantle the case, arguing that evidence was circumstantial and that the brothers had been set up by rivals jealous of their success. They painted Gavin and Ewan as hard-working men trying to rebuild their family farm, victims of misunderstanding and small-town gossip, but the carefully gathered surveillance and digital records left little room for doubt. A particularly powerful moment came when the secret of Gavin's son, Daniel, was revealed. Prosecutors argued that this hidden family scandal had motivated a violent past and shaped the ruthless behavior of the brothers. It was not just greed or power, it was a desperate attempt to control a dangerous secret that fueled their crimes. The court heard chilling testimony about Marcus Fraser's disappearance and the years of silence maintained through fear and bribery. Throughout the trial, the McNeils maintained their silence. They never testified, never showed remorse. Their stoic expressions seemed to deepen the divide between the public's fascination and their cold, hidden reality. The village watched as the men they once admired were slowly dismantled by the weight of truth. When the verdict was finally delivered, the courtroom was silent. Both Gavin and Ewan McNeil were found guilty on multiple counts: drug trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, and intimidation. Sentences totaled decades in prison, effectively ending their criminal reign. But the aftermath was far from simple.